Frost had already taken the parking lot at the Husky station off the Trans-Canada by the time Nolan Ashworth pulled in. The kind of hard September frost that meant winter was done, pretending it wasn't coming. He had $40 folded in his jacket pocket and a layoff letter folded twice in the other, the creases already gone soft from how many times his fingers had found it without meaning to. Inside, under the buzzing lights, a woman 2 spots ahead of him in line was trying a card for the 3rd time. The machine beeped red, then red again. She had a bag of groceries she'd already half put back, a phone with a cracked screen and a battery at 4%, and a voice she was working very hard to keep level. "I'm so sorry," she told the cashier. "It should be going through. I don't understand." Nolan stepped up before he'd decided to. He set 2 20s on the counter, one for her groceries and one folded under it that he didn't examine too closely, and told the cashier to put it toward whatever she needed. He didn't wait to be thanked. He was back in his truck before she'd turned around, and he didn't look at her twice in the rear view, because looking twice was how a man talked himself out of things he'd already decided to do. If a man believes small choices can still mean something, even on the worst week of his year, this is where it started. And what happened after would not have made sense to him 3 weeks earlier. The drive to Elmwood took 18 minutes on a good night. Nolan made it in 15, the old Silverado's heater rattling somewhere behind the dash the way it had for 2 winters running, a problem he kept telling himself he'd get to. He parked behind the narrow 2-story on Aiken Street, sat with the engine ticking as it cooled, and folded the layoff letter along its existing lines before it went into his jacket's inside pocket, the same place it had lived since Tuesday. Bird was at the kitchen table when he came up the back stairs, pencil gripped too hard the way 7-year-olds grip pencils, a worksheet of subtraction with borrowing spread in front of her. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Bird. How's the homework treating? Mrs. Okafor says I keep forgetting to borrow the one-ins forgive." He set his lunchbox on the counter. "You can always go back and get it." She smiled at the paper without looking up, and he walked past her to the bedroom, where he pushed the folded letter to the back of the bottom dresser drawer, under a stack of his wife's old cardigans he had never once managed to give away. He stood there a moment with his hand flat on the wood. The kitchen dissolved for a second the way it sometimes did, Colette laughing over a pan of something burning, her hair pinned up with an elastic band from a bag of carrots because she could never find a proper one. Then the hospital in Winnipeg 11 months later, the sound the machines made when the numbers started sliding the wrong direction. Then the morning of the funeral and the promise he'd made to no one but the mirror, "I will be here. I will be the one who's here." He came back to himself, closed the drawer, and pulled up his banking app at the kitchen table while Bird finished her worksheet. $61 in change, rent in 19 days, severance such as it was in 10 business days if the paperwork didn't snag. The math was tight without being impossible, which was the only kind of comfort Nolan allowed himself these days. "Dad?" "Yeah, Bird. Can we have waffles tomorrow?" He opened the fridge. Half a carton of eggs, a jug of milk with maybe 2 inches left, a jar of Saskatoon berry jam his mother-in-law sent every fall from Regina. "We can have waffles tomorrow." "Okay," she said it like a contract signed. They ate Kraft dinner from a box that had been in the cupboard 3 weeks, watched 20 minutes of a documentary about narwhals, and she let him braid her hair wrong before bed. Because his wrong way, she said, made her look like she'd survived something. After she was asleep, he lay on the couch in his clothes and thought about the woman at the gas station. Not what she'd bought, but the particular sound a voice makes when it's trying very hard not to break. He knew that sound from the inside. He'd made it himself 4 years ago, in a kitchen that didn't exist anymore, telling a 3-year-old her mother wasn't coming home. Isla Kavanagh went back to that Husky station on Monday. She told herself all weekend it was about the co-op's board packet, the 4 calls from the audit committee she hadn't returned, the numbers that wouldn't stop circling in her head at 2 in the morning. She knew, in the part of herself that didn't lie easily, that this wasn't the whole of it. She asked for the security footage. The kid behind the counter, recognizing her from the business section of the Free Press, pulled it without making anything of it. 40 seconds. A man in a canvas jacket setting money on the counter, gone before she could turn around. The lot camera caught the tailgate of his truck pulling onto Route 15, a decal on the back window half peeled, Bellevue Grain and Terminal. By 3 that afternoon, she was standing in a site trailer at the grain terminal on the edge of town, talking to a foreman in a Carhartt vest who answered her questions because she carried herself like someone used to getting them answered. Ashworth. Forklift. Second shift. Cut him loose Thursday, whole round of layoffs, solid worker, kept to himself. Why? He left something at a gas station I'd like to return. The foreman gave her the kind of look that decided not to be curious. Can't give out home addresses. She thanked him, went back to her car, and had her assistant Priya run the plate off the parking lot camera. 11 minutes later, she had an address on Aiken Street. The sky had gone the color of wet concrete by the time she knocked. Nolan opened the door and went still. I wanted to give this back, she said, holding out the folded 20, and this, a thick envelope. It was a gift. You don't return gifts. You didn't have the money to give it, she said. That doesn't stop it from being one. He looked at the envelope like it might be something other than what it was. She set it on the porch rail rather than push it on him again, said something about not needing charity, that this was a thank you and not the same thing, and turned to go. She was 2 steps down when something in the front window stopped her. Past his shoulder, a lamp on a second-hand end table, a small red parka thrown over a chair, and beyond it, a narrow bookshelf. 4 books. 3 she half recognized by their spines without needing to read the titles. Lying flat on top of them, a back issue of a policy journal, the cover line, Cooperative Equity Defense Structures in Member-Owned Financial Institutions. Author, printed small in white, N. Ashworth. She stood there exactly 3 seconds. Her face didn't move. She climbed back up. I forgot to thank you properly, she said, and held his eyes a beat longer than the sentence required. Something behind her expression had shifted and hadn't moved back. Nolan, who wasn't a stupid man, noticed. She drove off. He carried the envelope inside and found, not cash, but a heavy cream business card. Isla Kavanagh, Chief Executive Officer, Kavanagh Mutual. On the back, in small, careful handwriting, when you're ready. He searched her company name that night. The top result was an obituary 5 months old. Edwin Kavanagh, 66, cardiac event, survived by his daughter. He read it once, closed the laptop, and sat in the dark a long time. She didn't call for 3 days. He thought about her more than he wanted to admit and told himself otherwise. Thursday, his phone rang while he was loading pallets at a one-day gig. His old shift lead had thrown his way out of something between pity and respect. Nighthawk Coffee, Sherbrooke Street, 3 o'clock. If you don't come, I won't ask twice. She was already seated by the window when he arrived, a gray wool coat, no jewelry, her watch face down beside her cup, a detail he understood without needing it explained. He ordered a double-double out of habit and wrapped both hands around it. Corrigan Capital's been pressuring my board for 4 months, she said, no preamble. They want the co-op's grain storage equity pool broken apart and sold to 3 private operators. 9,000 prairie growers hold shares in that pool going back 3 generations in some families. Corrigan's public line is shareholder value. Their real angle is a vulnerability in how the equity structure was drafted. The exact kind you wrote about. He looked out at the street. I drive a forklift, Miss Kavanagh, 7 to 3. I'm home before my daughter's bus turns onto our street. I do that on purpose. I'm not going back to who I was. She didn't argue. She slid her cup to the middle of the table, stood, and pulled a 5 out of her coat pocket, having to dig for it, which she noticed him noticing. I lost my wallet at the airport in Toronto 2 weeks ago. Bank's still sorting the accounts. I don't usually carry cash. I don't usually need to. She left. He sat another 10 minutes, paid with change, and drove home saying nothing the whole way. Over supper, grilled cheese, canned tomato soup. Bird asked if he was sad. Thinking. Bird. Same thing sometimes. That night he read her the chapter where the spider explains gent to a frightened pig that everything ends but some things stay anyway, and afterward he sat at the kitchen table a long while before opening his laptop. He typed Corrigan Capital Kavanagh Mutual and read for 20 minutes, and the shape of the whole thing rose the way a face rises in dark water, slow, then all at once. Coordinated letters staged to look like grassroots shareholder concern, time to trip a mandatory audit review, the review used as cover for a forced sale. It was nearly the exact playbook he'd warned about 6 years earlier, after watching a smaller Saskatchewan co-op collapse the same way, 400 retired growers losing supplemental crop insurance coverage inside a year. One of those growers had farmed next to his own father outside Portage-la Prairie. His father had called him about it, furious and helpless in the same breath. He ran the numbers on the Winnipeg Co-op the way he used to run them for a living. 9,000 growers, average payout dependent on the pool staying intact. If Corrigan split it and sold to private buyers with no obligation to honor the storage guarantees, most of those farms would find out inside a season that the safety net they'd counted on for retirement was gone. At 7 the next morning, he called the number on the back of the card. "I'll listen," he said, not promising anything, but I'll listen. A small breath on the other end, not quite relief. "Thank you, Saturday morning, I'll send the address." He went to his dresser, opened the top drawer, and lifted out a small wooden box he hadn't touched in 3 years. A plain gold watch inside, the one Colette had given him the year he made director. He held it a moment, didn't put it on, and closed the lid. Then he made bird waffles. "Are you going to work today?" "A different kind of work. Just for a few weeks." "Is it a good kind?" "I think it might be, Bird." Kavanagh Mutual occupied a stone building at the corner of Portage and Main, and on the 4th floor there was a conference room with no name on the door, just a keypad, and very few people who knew the code. Saturday at 7, Nolan walked into that room for the first time in 3 years and 4 months. Isla was already there, along with an older woman in a gray blazer, silver hair cut short, reading glasses on a chain. "Nolan, this is Vivian Ostrander. She's been with my family 30 years. There's nothing in this building she doesn't see, and nothing she carries that she hasn't earned the right to." Vivienne's handshake was light and dry. "A pleasure, Mr. Ashworth." He didn't recognize her, though years before, on a pension file in Toronto, she'd been one of 19 junior analysts he'd barely looked up from his own work to notice. Her hair had been brown then. She hadn't been hired at Kavanagh Mutual on the strength of that history. She'd earned her own 26 years running. She poured him tea. Isla pushed 3 binders across the table. Every filing Corrigan had made, every internal risk classification, 14 months of audit committee correspondence, redactions all her own. He read for 2 hours without a word, pen down, pages turned unevenly and never out of order. When he closed the 3rd binder, he looked up. "You've got a leak. 4 sign-offs on document approvals show up in Corrigan's filings inside 96 hours of being generated internally. None of the 4 had public reason to know what those documents contained. I won't name anyone yet. I want to confirm one thing first." Vivienne set her cup down. The small sound of porcelain was loud in the room. That night in the garage on Aiken Street, Nolan pulled down a box he'd sealed 3 years earlier. Inside was an old phone, dead battery, one unheard voicemail dated 5 months back. He plugged it in and let it wake slowly the way old phones do. "Mr. Ashworth, my name is Edwin Kavanagh. I've read your paper on cooperative equity structures more times than I'll admit. I'm not asking you back to anything. I'm asking you to call me before something happens I can't undo." Edwin Kavanagh had died 2 weeks after leaving that message. Nolan sat on the cold concrete a long time. At 10 that night, Vivian knocked at his door with a folder under her arm and an apology already on her face. "I owe you an introduction I didn't give this morning. Years ago I worked briefly on your Hanover file in Toronto. You won't remember me. There were 19 of us. I'm telling you only so you know I'm not asking you to take this on faith." She opened the folder. Photocopied pages, small tabs, and on the first sheet, in a careful older man's hand, "Ashworth, Cooperative Angle. Before Corrigan moves." His name circled twice. Mr. Kavanagh was careful and private. He started writing in that notebook about 4 months before he died. He'd approached 3 restructuring firms. Each had a conflict with Corrigan somewhere in its book of business. Yours was the only clean name left on his list. She looked at her hands. He had a full cardiac workup that spring. Clean. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything I could prove in a courtroom. I'm telling you what I know, and I'm telling you what I don't, and leaving the difference where it belongs." She left him with the folder on his lap and the house very quiet. At 11:31 he called Isla. They stayed on the line 34 minutes and spoke, between them, for maybe 5 of those. Neither of them asked whether he was in. Neither needed to. For 7 days he came in through the loading entrance at 6:30, took the freight elevator, and worked the unmarked room until 3:45, home before Bird's bus reached the corner. What he built in 3 layers. First, he moved the equity pool out of the co-op's direct balance sheet into an independent trust governed by a board drawn from the Manitoba Institute of Agrologists and a retired provincial court judge, bound by a 15-year covenant. Any attempt to liquidate or restructure would trigger automatic disbursement to all 9,000 growers at full value. There would be nothing left worth buying. Second, an 80% supermajority requirement on any future sale. The Kavanagh family, through Isla and Instruments, Edwin had set up decades earlier, controlled 44% outright and had cultivated another 17 through relationships built over a lifetime, enough that the threshold made any other vote a personal liability for everyone involved. Third, a tripwire. Any board or executive signature on a restructuring document without unanimous consent would trigger automatic removal for cause, no severance, no options. He built that clause specifically with Foster Wexler in mind. On the fourth day, Vivian handed him the server logs. 7 attachments over 5 months from the COO's machine to a numbered account 2 shell layers deep, tracing back to a subsidiary wholly owned by Corrigan Capital. The last attachment was the audit committee's internal risk file, sent 6 days before Corrigan's most recent letter to the board, a letter that had cited that exact document by name. Nolan didn't call the police. That fight wasn't in front of him yet. What was in front of him was a Monday board meeting. Friday at 11 he brought the final draft up to the executive floor. Isla stood at the window of her father's old office, back to the door, the lights of downtown gathering below in low rows. He set the papers on the desk. "He should still be here," she said without turning. "He tried," Nolan said. "That's the reason I'm standing in this room." She didn't answer. "After a while, go home to your daughter." Saturday. His phone buzzed at midnight. "Need your signature on 3 documents. Notary present." 7:30? "Fine," he wrote back. He was up early, griddle warming, a bowl of batter on the counter, still in the flannel he'd slept half the night in without deciding to. Bird came down at 7:28 in the fleece pajamas with the loons printed on them, stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "Dad, there's a car outside." "I know, Bird." "Work thing." "A good kind." The bell rang. Bird got there first, looked up at the woman on the step, and tilted her head with the particular scrutiny of a 7-year-old cataloging a stranger. "You're the lady from the gas station." Isla, who had not braced for this, went very still. "That's the right lady, Dad told me. Mostly the part about your phone dying. You should come in," Bird said. "We're having waffles." The notary arrived 7 minutes later, stamped 3 signatures, accepted a coffee, and was gone inside of 10. No one moved for a moment after the door closed. Nolan set a plate in front of Bird, a plate in front of the chair Isla was sitting in, and one for himself. "Syrup on top, or in the little dish on top?" Bird nodded, satisfied, like a suspicion confirmed, and spent the next 20 minutes explaining the classroom hamster's opinions of various children. Isla listened to every word of it. When Nolan set down his coffee cup, he did it half a second slower than the cup before, and Isla, watching him exactly then, saw it and said nothing. Nobody said the word Corrigan. Nobody said Wexler. Nobody said board. The morning sun moved across the fence in the small, precise way prairie light moves when for 1 hour nothing at all is wrong. At 9:15, Isla said she had to go. Bird insisted on walking her to the door, because she had decided this was the sort of guest one walked to the door. When the car had pulled away, she turned to her father. "Is she coming back tomorrow?" He crouched down to her height. "I don't know, Bird. I hope so." "Me too," she said, and went to brush her teeth. The board met at 10 Monday morning in a long room on the 22nd floor, a portrait of Edwin's own father on the wall behind the head chair. 11 seats, 9 voting members, 2 non-voting attendees. Grant Corrigan, holding just over 6% of Class A shares in his own name, and phosphorating officer. Vivian stood at the back with a manila folder and a face that gave away nothing. Isla opened without raising her voice. 2 short paragraphs read into the minutes. As of Friday at 5:36 in the evening, the equity pool had been transferred by valid corporate action into an independent trust, registered that morning with the province, irreversible for 60 days, and beyond that reversible only by an 80% supermajority. Silence. Grant Corrigan stood, 4 versions of a shareholder value speech apparently ready behind his teeth. He got 2 words out before the side door opened. Nolan walked in wearing a charcoal suit Isla had pressed for him without telling him, and a shirt he'd ironed himself at 6 that morning, 1 folder in his hand. He stopped at the corner of the table. "For the record," Isla said, not looking at him, "I'd like to introduce the architect of the trust structure I've just described. Nolan Ashworth, formerly of Halloway and Birtwistle, Toronto, author of the paper this board's opposing counsel has clearly read at least once." Corrigan's face didn't move. Nolan set a printed copy of his own paper on the table. "I wrote the strategy your firm's built its whole approach on, Mr. Corrigan. I also wrote what stops it. Today's the first day I've seen the two of them in the same room." Corrigan sat down without being asked. Isla nodded once to Vivienne, who walked the folder's length of the table and set it in front of Foster Wexler. He opened it, read for perhaps 9 seconds, and went very white around the mouth. "You have 2 hours to clear your office," Isla said. "The disciplinary committee will be in touch by week's end. You'll sign nothing on this company's behalf before then. Security's outside." Wexler left without a word, his back straighter than it had any right to be. Corrigan, looking at no one, said, "I'd like to formally withdraw the offer we extended on the 11th. The minutes will reflect that," Isla said. The meeting adjourned 31 minutes after it opened. 3 weeks after the gas station off the Trans-Canada, on a Tuesday morning with frost still on the windshields downtown, Isla walked Nolan down the executive corridor and stopped at a door that had gone unopened since April. She turned the handle and held out a small ring of keys. "Chief Restructuring Officer, Co-Chief Executive, Kavanaugh Mutual. This isn't for the $40, she said. "I know. It's for the fact that you gave a stranger the last card you had that still worked, on a day you didn't have to." He went in and didn't sit right away, walked the room's perimeter first, the way a man walks a space he plans on staying in a long while. He paused at the window, then at the shelf, still Edwin's, mostly cleared of books but full of small things nobody had had the heart to box up. When he came back to the desk, he opened the top drawer out of nothing but old habit. A $20 bill lay folded inside, and beside it an index card in Isla's handwriting. A date, the name of a husky station off the highway, nothing else. She had never spent it. He looked at it a moment and closed the drawer without touching either. That afternoon at 10 to 4, Bird came through the lobby in her red parka, holding Vivienne's hand, because Isla had asked Vivienne to walk her from Riverview Elementary, and Vivienne liked walking children to the doors of important buildings. Isla was waiting, and knelt down to meet her eye to eye. "Hi, Bird." Bird studied her a moment with the frank attention 7-year-olds reserve for guests who've earned it. "Are we doing waffles again Saturday? I'd like that very much. Same syrup rules?" "Same syrup rules." Bird nodded once, matter settled. Nolan stood back a step, watching. When Isla rose, the back of her hand brushed the back of his for less than a second, and both of them looked at the floor for a beat and said nothing about it, and then the three of them walked together toward the elevators, past a portrait of a man who had spent the last months of his life trying to reach exactly this outcome and hadn't lived to see it land. He had given her the last money he had on a night he couldn't afford to. She had given him a place to belong on a morning she couldn't have built without him. Neither of them had a word ready for what that was, and neither went looking for one, because the things that lasted, they were learning, were rarely the ones that needed saying out loud.